A few years back, on Halloween when I was a freshman in high school, my best friend George came over to hang out. My mother is a nurse and was working night shifts at the time, so we were home alone. I made us a frozen pizza and we played some video games while trick-or-treaters would ring the doorbell every so often. The neighborhood I lived in was decently busy, so my mother left a big bowl of candy for us to pass out. We pretty much did just those things until the trick-or-treaters stopped at around 10 p.m. At that point, I turned off all the lights in the house, made some popcorn, and put on a scary movie. We watched it, and afterwards we weren't tired yet, so we decided to put on another scary film. At about midnight, shortly into the second film, I heard the bush behind the living room window moving and a scratch against the window. I'm not gonna lie, it really freaked me out. I told myself I was just paranoid, but then George said, "What was that?" and looked at me. I looked to the window, but it was too dark to really see anything, and had blinds covering up a good portion of it. I said it was probably nothing, and we focused our attention back on the TV. 10 minutes later, just when I was forgetting about all the noise, we heard something else. This time, it was the sound of tapping on the back window of the house. I said once again that it was probably nothing, but me and George were both pretty freaked out. We paused the movie and walked over to the kitchen area, which is where the noise came from, and glanced out the window. It was dark, but we saw nothing, so we went back into the living room. We unpaused the movie, but this time I was more freaked out than before, and I was feeling very paranoid. A couple of minutes later, we heard the sound of glass being shattered coming from the kitchen. It was one of the scariest moments of my life. Without hesitation, me and George both ran downstairs into the basement bathroom and locked the door. We didn't know exactly what had happened, but we figured that somebody broke into the house. George took out his phone and we called the police. They said they would arrive within 10 minutes, and they stayed on the line with us. The lady on the line told us to remain calm, but it was pretty tough. We heard a couple of doors open upstairs, and sometimes would hear footsteps, but other than that we really couldn't hear anything. Then we heard the door to the basement open. We didn't hear anything after that, but me and George were definitely not going to open the door in fear that somebody was down there with us. We just sat there on the bathroom floor, trying not to make a sound, and waited. The wait felt like such a long time, and finally we heard a knocking on the front door and somebody announced they were police. On the count of 3, George and I both made a run for it upstairs and to the front door. Once we were there, we went outside and spoke to a couple of officers, while other officers searched our house. The man was gone though, and a few things were messed up and stolen inside. My mother returned home shortly after that, and George's parents came and picked him up. It was the scariest Halloween for sure. Last Halloween, my sister and I threw a Halloween party at our house. We were both fairly popular college girls, and we knew there would be a lot of people to come to the party. We decorated our place up a little bit, and then put on our costumes. Our close friends were the first people to show up at about 5 p.m., and then slowly more and more people came. Eventually, our house had about 100 college kids in it, all wearing costumes. It was a pretty fun time, until one of my friends came up to me and complained about a man dressed up in an Albert Einstein costume who was annoying some of the girls. I looked around the room until I saw the guy. He was wearing a full mask, so I had no clue as to who he was. He was standing in the corner of the room, so I walked over to him. He looked at me, and I asked who he was. He didn't answer at all and didn't say a word. It was pretty loud in there, so I walked into the kitchen, which was empty, and he followed me in. I told him some people were complaining about him and asked him again who he was. He still just stood there and didn't say anything. Then I told him he should leave. I wasn't sure if it was one of my friends trying to be funny or just a random kid. Then he started to approach me and got very close. I felt uncomfortable and I left the room to get my friend Jack. I told him about the guy and asked if he knew who he was. Jack said he didn't know him at all. We both went back to see if we could find the Einstein guy, but he seemed to be gone. We looked around a little bit, but didn't see him anywhere, so we figured he left, and I was very relieved. The rest of the party was pretty fun, and people started to leave at about 1 o'clock in the morning. I was pretty tired at that point, and before long, it was just my sister, me, and a few of our close friends at the house. We hung out for a little while, and then I went upstairs to go to bed. I got ready for bed, and then turned out the light and got under the covers. I closed my eyes and was starting to drift off to sleep when I heard my closet door open. I opened my eyes and looked in the direction of my closet. I saw the guy in the Albert Einstein mask coming out of the closet and walking towards me. As he did, he removed his mask. It wasn't a college kid at all. It was a man who looked to be about 40 or 50 years old. He had grayish hair and a scruffy beard. I screamed as loud as I could like a little girl. The man had the creepiest smile on his face that I'd ever seen. When he got to my bed, I got up and ran to the corner of the room. He started to follow after me. I heard my friends coming upstairs at that point. Thankfully, they were still at my house. My friends Jack and Ben ran to the man and pulled him away from me. There was a little bit of a struggle, but they were both easily able to overpower him. They ended up holding him there until the police came. A short while later, the man was arrested. I'm lucky that my friends were still there to help me that night. This story took place 2 years ago. It was Halloween evening at about 6 or 7 p.m., and I was at my house watching TV. As I went to the kitchen to get some food, I noticed a man dressed up with one of those horse head masks on, walking up my driveway. I live a little bit out in the country, and the houses are pretty far apart. Because of this, I have never received a single trick-or-treater the entire 5 years I've been living here, so this really surprised me. In fact, I didn't have any candy in the house at all, because I wasn't expecting anybody. I looked around my kitchen to see if maybe I had something I could give the kid, but I saw nothing. I felt bad, and I decided to just go tell him that I was sorry, but I didn't have anything to give him. As I walked towards my front door, I heard the knob start to turn. It jiggled a bit, and then I heard pressure against the door, as if whoever was there was trying to enter my house. Then I heard him walk away, and I saw him from the window walking through my yard to the side of my house. He no longer seemed like some innocent trick-or-treater. Now I was a little bit concerned. I stepped out of the house and looked around, but he was gone to the side where I couldn't see him. I went back inside and made sure that all of my windows and doors were locked. Then I looked out of some of the windows, but I didn't see anything. After that, I went back to watching TV, but was ready to call the police if I needed to. A few hours went by and nothing happened. Then at about 10 p.m., there was a single doorbell ring at my front door. I slowly walked over to it and looked out the window, but nobody was there. I was beginning to get annoyed, and I opened the door and shouted that if there was any more of this nonsense, I would call the police. Thankfully, nothing else happened for the rest of the night. However, when I woke up the next morning, I looked out my window, and I saw that hanging on a tree branch directly facing my bedroom was the horse face mask that the person had been wearing the night before. It was a pretty creepy thing to see. I used to go trick-or-treating with my siblings or my friends every year when I was little. One year, when I was probably about 6 or 7 years old, we got dressed in our costumes and went outside to start trick-or-treating. When I got outside, I noticed that in my next-door neighbor's second-floor window, there was a scary-looking man. It caught my attention because I knew that there was no grown man that lived in that house. The man in the window was wearing a jacket and a hat, but I couldn't really make out any details of his face. He looked pretty creepy, and he seemed to be looking out the window, but not really moving. So after a while, I started to think that it was just a Halloween decoration. I had to admit that it had me fooled, but if it was a decoration, it seemed pretty cool. After looking at it some more, I figured that's what it was, and we went on with our trick-or-treating. We were gone several hours, and I ended up getting lots of candy and then came back home. The man in the window was gone now, but it was pretty late, so I didn't really think anything of it. The next day, I saw my friend who lived in the house, and I asked him about the man in the window, if it was a Halloween decoration that he put up. He looked confused when I asked him, and he said that they didn't put up any decorations and they were gone the night before. I thought he was joking at first, but he maintained that he wasn't there, and he seemed pretty serious about it. It was creepy to think about it after that. This story happened many years ago when I was about 8 years old. I went trick-or-treating with my best friend Bobby. We would often trick-or-treat together and then sleep over at each other's houses afterwards. It was a fun tradition. On this year, we were determined to get as much candy as we possibly could, so after going through my neighborhood, we went farther down the street into another neighborhood. I had never really been over there, but there were a lot more houses, and that meant more candy for us. We went to house after house for hours, and finally it reached about 9 p.m., and more houses had their lights turned off, so we decided to start wrapping it up. We decided to finish the street we were on because there was only one more house left on it. When we got to the front door, we rang the bell. An older man answered it. He smiled at us and said that he hadn't had many trick-or-treaters in a while and had his candy put away. We said that that was okay and started to turn around to leave. The man stopped us and insisted that we should get some candy. He said he had been giving out king-sized candy bars and they were just upstairs in his house. Then he motioned for us to come inside. I felt kind of uncomfortable going in a stranger's house, but he seemed nice and Bobby was already inside, so I followed. We walked into the front door and up the stairs. The man walked behind us. But once we got upstairs, I didn't see any candy. Bobby asked the man where the candy was, and the man replied that he must have misplaced it. Bobby turned around and went back down the stairs and said we were leaving. I was more than happy to see this, and I followed him right out the door. The man asked us to stay, but at this point, he was just seeming creepy, so we left. After that, we walked back to my house and started eating our candy. It was the most candy we had ever gotten. We went in my room and hung out and played some video games. It was a really fun night, until we were playing Madden and Bobby said, "Remember the old man that made us go in his house?" "Yeah," I said. "I think I see him in the window." I thought Bobby had to be joking and I laughed, but then he told me he was serious. I looked over and sure enough saw him. The old man wasn't looking at us and seemed to be walking around about 10 feet away from the window. We watched him walk up to the side of our house and look in another window, which was the kitchen. Then he made his way back over to my room, and when he got to our window, we both ducked and ran for the other end of the room. We hid so that we couldn't see the window, but we heard the man pressing his face up against it. We waited in silence for about a minute, and then we both looked at the same time. When we did, we saw the man's face pressed up against the glass looking directly at us. He had a disgusting and creepy smile on his face. Me and Bobby both ran as fast as we could to my parents' room, screaming the whole time. My father came out and we told him everything. He called the police and then went outside. He came back in saying he didn't see anything, and the police arrived shortly after that. We were able to tell the police where the man lived, and he ended up being arrested. I felt much safer after that.